Welcome to the HOJ-Cast episode number 34. Going to be a great deep dive today. We're going to have lots of great card discussion, set discussion, history, all the normal goodies. And then we're going to have some sports talk too. But I've punted that to the end mostly of this episode, under the assumption that most people probably don't want to hear me talk about sports, especially because I'm quite biased as a collector. It's interesting to think about collectors as stakeholders in ongoing sports events, whether you are a collector of a retired player and sort of you are incentivized. I'm not saying you necessarily do, but you're incentivized to sort of, at least on some level, root against any individual active player accumulating too many accolades, because that can start to threaten the status of other players on the Mount Rushmores of different sports. Although there's also another side to that too, which says, hey, a great young player accumulating accolades in the sport that I collect a Hall of Famer of brings a spotlight to the sport, and it sort of helps. And maybe you don't really believe in cross-generation comparisons, sort of like Michael Jordan does, but I think it's fair to say that there is some level of incentive suggesting that collecting retired Hall of Famers does tend to mitigate towards wanting to see parity among the up-and-coming young players, and not any player who can potentially overtake the Hall of Famer that we collect. But there's the point of that little diatribe was just to say that obviously I'm biased as a collector. Obviously we are biased as collectors, not necessarily in the same way, but there are incentives. Incentives certainly are influential on behavior. And then there's just also just the flat out bias that we're going to potentially be supportive of specific, outcomes that are more beneficial to the way we want the legacy of a sport to fall, the way we want to think about the players that we collect, the way we want to remember and revere the legacies of those players that we are collecting, and that symbolize things that are meaningful to us. So I say all that to say that knowing that I have a bias, that probably makes me not such an interesting person to talk to about sports, unless you agree with me, or you're looking to see sort of the ways that I might discuss or bring up points that maybe fall in line with some of the points of view that you have, if you're also biased. And let's not pretend that anybody is unbiased, although certainly members of the media, certainly members purporting to cover the entire league, they certainly are expected, I think, by most of us to try and be as unbiased as possible. And that simply is not the position that a collector is coming from. And I'm gonna talk more about that when we get to that sort of section of the show. The difference between advocacy for a player, whether it's a retired player or an active player, doesn't matter. The difference between taking the position of advocacy, which I think is defensible. So in other words, I do think that as long as it's known in advance that there is something interesting about listening to somebody advocate rather than adjudicate, or rather than function as a jury. So I think there's a place for people who have to try and be impartial and objective and give a totally neutral point of view. And that's sort of the position that the collector finds themselves in prior to selecting the players that they'll collect. But once those selections are made, the shift can tend to happen from impartiality to advocacy, and that's fine. There's a place for advocacy, but we'll dive into that in a little more depth when we get to that. It's going to be later in the show. So basically, here's the sketch of the show. I'm going to open with a little bit of NBA history that's going to set the stage for the episode. It's relevant to what follows, that's why. And then I'm going to talk about a few sports card sales that happened recently of Nikola Jokic. This is going to be a heavy Nikola Jokic episode. This will be the episode sort of dedicated to him for the 2025-26 season. And it's going to be dedicated to him because it's going to tie into a social media post that I made yesterday about one of his key rookie one-of-ones that I added to my collection some time ago, and also two more cards from that lineage. So it's actually three cards that are going to get discussed, but the lion's share of the focus is going to be on the rookie year 1 of 1. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about some big Jokic sales, some headline grabbing Jokic sales that happened recently, 2 of them. Then we'll get to the cards that I want to reveal. And then we're going to get to the sports talk and sort of discuss Jokic's season and maybe have a few thoughts on MVP and just kind of say a few words about the 2025-26 efforts of Nikola Jokic. And by the way, for friends, fellow collectors, listeners who are wondering when's Luka going to get his episode, knowing that I'm a big fan and collector of Luka as well, I think that's going to be next. I think that's going to be the next episode that I do. And it's quite timely to finally do the Luka episode because he's right now he's in the midst of playing some really special basketball. The last game he played was he poured in 60 points. He's really almost gotten to the point where you expect a 60 or a 70 point game out of him at least once every season. And I'm always trying to anticipate when it's going to be, because I remember watching that 73 point game against the Hawks a few years ago, and it had become quite obvious by the end of the first quarter that something special was happening because he just couldn't miss. And he ended up shooting 25 of 33 from the field in that game, making it the most ethical 70 ball in league history, according to Bleacher Report. So let's and then at the end, like if I'm feeling up to it, because sometimes these start to run really long and then the energy wanes. But if I'm feeling up to it at the end, I've got some philosophical musings about big picture, I guess sociological, some thoughts about about finding meaning and finding meaning and value in the act of collecting in the context of just being a human in this world, and sort of struggling with making sure that when I'm collecting or when we're collecting that we're making the most of our time. Sometimes those reflective moments, those moments of introspection, notwithstanding Mark Andreessen's comments, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I don't know. I saw he was going viral on Twitter for sort of advocating the point of view that introspection is not something to get bogged down with. It's a relatively new thing. It's anyway, and it was just funny watching sort of the back and forth and watching people talk past each other on that, because I could see where he was coming, but I also could see how people would take that and run with it and bash him over the head with it a few times, especially when it's coming from an obnoxiously wealthy, very smart, very capable person. Sort of, it might play a little bit weird on the surface, somebody sort of telling you don't introspect, but there was a lot more nuance to it than that. But let's get to the topic. You can see I'm even surprising myself with how pensive I'm feeling today. So here's where we start. I think this is such a neat list. So the list I have on the screen is from Basketball Reference, and it is the NBA and ABA year-by-year leaderboard for the player who led the league in player efficiency rating, also known as PER, created by John Hollinger. Now, PER got a bad rap at some point over the last 10 years or so, sort of as the analytics revolution has taken hold and as people have tried to figure out what are they even measuring with these catch-all basketball statistics, and are we, the idea of the good stats, bad team player, and what's the point of production, and even what's the point of efficiency if it's not contributing to winning? What is the goal? What are we optimizing for when we try to measure performance? And so the player efficiency rating is not an impact metric. It isn't looking at any lineup data. It's not looking at plus minus. It is totally oblivious to it. It's something simpler. It's something more easily calculated by hand. I was trying to say calculable, I'm not, but we can just really just go with much more easily calculated by hand than some of these other adjusted plus minus models, which deal with millions of stints of data, and they just need the processing of a giant machine in order to calculate them. PER is much simpler. It's much more direct. John Hollinger himself sort of sums it up as saying PER is just simply, let's give credit to all the positive box score contributions that a player makes. Let's give demerits for all the negative things that they do, such as turnovers. And then let's combine that into one number after adjusting it for pace and league average. So the idea here in a nutshell is that Hollinger is looking at every box score number that is measured, everything from field goal percentage, free throw percentage, points, rebounds, assists, steals, fouls, turnovers. And he's gathering it all, and he's aggregating it to see what league averages are, and he's looking at the pace to see how many possessions are played, and so he's compressing all these things into one number that's equally applied to each player's statistical accumulations over the course of a season in order to spit out one number that then ranks the players. All right. And so it got a bad rap because it veers away from the impact. And if it's being sort of substituted as an impact metric, that's not quite what it's doing. Although I would bet that there's a pretty strong correlation between player efficiency rating and impact metrics, at least at the top of these lists every season. And a lot of these impact metrics now are using quite a bit of box score data to stabilize themselves, since adjusted plus minus modeling can be wildly noisy. So I think, in other words, player efficiency rating got a bad rap because it's misunderstood, and because it's an outlier. It's a misfit. And as everything veered towards impact metrics, player efficiency rating just didn't go with that movement. It's a different school of thought. It's something that's simply saying, let's just look at your box score production, and let's look in particular at how efficiently you do it. Both from the efficiency of scoring, the efficiency of how much positive playmaking through assisting and offensive rebounding you do versus how many turnovers you make, and rate it on a per minute basis to equalize. And then let's create this one number and this catch-all number. And so the way to think about player efficiency rating, I think, is that it's very much in tune with how the ordinary fan, or the fan of even some sophistication, is going to evaluate the game. When they say, well, what happened in the game? And they open up the box score and they look at all the different numbers. They say, well, he had 30 points and 8 rebounds and 5 assists, and he shot 40% from 3, and he had 6 free throws, and he made 5 out of the 6, and but he had 7 turnovers, and so it's sort of like the fan will look at those statistics and sort of form a holistic picture of how the player performed based on reviewing them all and sort of compressing them in their mind and putting a weight to each of them and sort of saying, okay, so he scored a lot, but he had a lot of turnovers, but shot well from the free throw line, and so overall the player had a nice game, had a strong game. And so player efficiency rating is just doing that thought process for you and doing it in a fair way that applies to every single player's box score, so that we don't end up accidentally overweighting turnovers against one player, or giving a different player too much credit for scoring when they did it very inefficiently, when they missed a lot of shots along the way, and so on. And so clearly you can see problems here. Like, this is devoid of sort of the context of what was happening on the floor. This is devoid of impact. This is just box score porn. Okay, that's what it is. Player efficiency rating is just sort of doing the most you can, I think, reasonably with what is in the box score without trying to say anything about impact. So I think I've given a defense there of player efficiency rating, because once we understand what it's doing, once we understand that it's just taking sort of the more casual surface level discussion of what happens when we look at a box score and just helping us fairly allocate each of those statistics across each player and then create one number to compare them by. I think it's pretty neat what it's doing, actually. I think it's actually a language that we all have in common. I think impact metrics are more cerebral, more difficult to understand, more sophisticated, but a formula like player efficiency rating is something that's intuitive, something that almost everybody could grasp. So for that reason, I like it. And for the reason that if we weren't looking at player efficiency rating, but instead we were looking at a very sophisticated model like box plus minus, which is attempting to measure impact and is using lineup data, but in a very creative way, in an unusual way. But I think that we would find that a lot of the results are pretty darn similar. But I want to use I want to use player efficiency rating because it is that common language, because we can understand what it's saying and what it's doing, and because I think it's the pendulum has swung too far on descent of player efficiency rating. I think it does offer something. We just need to know what it's offering. And so anyway, you can then sort of look at which players have scored highest on player efficiency rating as I go through this list with you. Because the point of me presenting this list is to contextualize Nikola Jokic historically, to set the stage for all the discussions that are going to follow in the show. So Jokic right now is in his 6th consecutive season of leading the NBA in player efficiency rating. So he's led the NBA in player efficiency rating since the 2020-2021 season, and he is coasting to another first-place finish. And for much of the season, he had the highest player efficiency rating of all time for a single season, and he still does, but he is very narrowly holding on to that. He has that by 2/100ths of a point now over himself, his 2021-22 season in which he won an MVP. His second MVP was that's the current record for the highest season. So Jokic has the last 6 seasons, including the current one. Before that, Giannis swept it twice. Then we had Harden lead the league for a season, then Westbrook, then Curry, and Anthony Davis. So we had 4 different guys lead the league in player efficiency rating before giving way to Giannis twice and then Jokic 6 times. And then Kevin Durant had took his turn leading the league for a season. And then we get to another dominant stretch of LeBron James, who also had 6 consecutive seasons where he led the league in player efficiency rating. So we sort of had the LeBron era of 6, then we had some parity, and then we go back to the Jokic era of 6. And then before LeBron, we had a bit of parity. Wade, Nowitzki, 2 Garnetts, a McGrady. And then we have 5 straight Shaq seasons, 5 for Shaq. All right, so 6 straight for LeBron, 6 straight for Jokic, and 5 for Shaq. Before Shaq, we had a Malone season. We had 3 David Robinson seasons, and then 7 Michael Jordan seasons. So Michael Jordan, with the 7 consecutive seasons, slightly edges out Jokic, who has 6 in a row, and that is an active streak for Jokic, obviously. And LeBron, who had 6, and Shaq, who had 5. And then before Jordan, we get 2 Larry Bird seasons. We get an Adrian Dantley season. We get 2 Moses Malone seasons. Now we get to the Kareem era. So there's Kareem, Dr. J, Kareem 4 times in a row. And then now we have overlapping ABA and NBA. So Kareem actually, 5 seasons in a row for Kareem there from 74 through 78. And then Bob McAdoo leads the NBA. And then Kareem, 3 more in a row going back to 70. Kareem ultimately ends up leading the NBA in player efficiency rating 9 times, which is the most of any player. But the longest streak was 5. The longest streak of them he had was 5. So Kareem has 9, 5 in a row. MJ 7, Jokic and LeBron 6, Shaq 5. All right, and then before Kareem, we get to the Wilt Chamberlain era. And so Wilt ultimately ends up having 8. He has 8 seasons where he led the league, the NBA, in player efficiency rating, and he had a streak of 6 in a row. So Wilt has the streak of 6, just like Jokic and LeBron. Wilt has 8 total, so in total surpassing MJ, but MJ had the streak of 7 in a row. and then Wilt only trailing Kareem. And then if we go before that, now we're getting to the 50s. So we have a season with Elgin Baylor. We have 4 seasons where Bob Pettit led the NBA player efficiency rating. Neil Johnston gets a season where he led it. And then the first 3 seasons were led by George Mikan. Okay, so the context here is this. All right, so most seasons lead the league in player efficiency rating, Kareem with 9. Wilt, second with 8. Michael Jordan, third with 7. And Jordan 7 is the largest streak. And then LeBron and Jokic with 6, and then Shaq with 5. And I think something that is worth adding here contextually is that as the league got larger, as the talent pool expanded, as the talent pool became more international, and quite literally hundreds, millions of more people vying for these same 450 or even fewer starting roster spots in the NBA, that to do the 6 that LeBron and Jokic did and in the more modern era is quite is perhaps on par with for example Wilt gathering 8 or Kareem gathering 9 or even Michael Jordan gathering 7. Simply because Jordan was playing during and Jordan was accumulating his during an era where the league had a team number in the mid-20s and the international influence was growing, but really hadn't totally infused itself in the NBA the way it has today. And then Kareem was rattling off his accomplishments while a different league was sitting on half of the domestic talent pool, which was the ABA. And then Wilt was doing it with a league that had 8, 10, 12 teams in it. So I think that there's some parity here that you sort of have this list of the statistically dominant players. If we treat player efficiency rating as a proxy for who dominated the league in box score production and in efficiency, you really get this Mount Rushmore. It's really more than a Mount Rushmore. It's more than 4 players, but you get this list. You get this Jokic, this LeBron, Shaq, Michael Jordan, Kareem, Wilt. That you get that list. Okay, and it's pretty special for Jokic to be a part of that. It's quite special. It really looked like for a while there after LeBron that there was just going to be a different guy leading the league in this metric every year. And then Jokic said, no, I'm going to statistically dominate the 2020s. And so he did. I think that's really good context for understanding who and what Jokic is. Jokic, from how I see it, and a big reason of why I'm such an advocate for his legacy and why I'm such a passionate collector, is precisely because of things like this, because his name is being etched on lists like this, right next to LeBron, right next to Michael Jordan, right next to Shaquille O'Neal, right next to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain. And so that's the company that he keeps statistically. And it's pretty special, and it's fun to talk about it now. There was so much pomp and circumstance for Jokic, and there still is a lot. But the Nuggets are having a little bit of a down season. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what shakes out when the playoffs get here. But it's more fun to talk about him and shine a spotlight on him when everybody else isn't doing it. And so I do kind of feel like seizing that moment right now, doing that. So having set the stage and sort of given that little fun background on Jokic and sort of the company that he's placed himself in statistically with this 6-year run that he's on, and sort of also anticipating that from the point of view of player efficiency rating, not only is this his best season ever, but this is the best season ever. So one wonders, is he even getting better still? Player efficiency rating thinks that he is. So let's now talk about some sales. And you can see here that I have pulled up a picture of Jokic from the 2015 Summer League. And I pulled up this picture for a very specific reason. Jokic is wearing the number 1 on his Summer League jersey for the Nuggets during the Summer League. And that's not his jersey number. His jersey number as an NBA player is 15. Okay, but he wore 1 during that Summer League. And here's why that matters. That matters because Jokic on March 14th, so I guess that was last weekend, his Prism Gold rookie, which has 10 copies, in the grade of BGS 9.5, sold for $319,640 with Goldin auctions. Now, that card had previously surfaced in 2018 publicly. I'm not sure if any changed hands privately, but I know that a BGS 9.5 last sold publicly. The last public sale on the record was in 2018, and it was for maybe $1,000 or $2,000. So one of these not coming out for 8 years, and none publicly surfacing in any grade in the auction setting or in a publicly recorded transaction for 8 years. In other words, for the entirety of that statistical dominance, from when he became, this sort of wilt of the modern era, for there to have been no sales certainly created a lot of pressure, a lot of pent-up demand, as an economist would say, for this card to finally make its way back to the public market. So it's a very large number, but that number needs the context of the fact that the market had been starved for any of these 10 copies in the public setting for 8 years. But still, it's a noteworthy number. It's the highest sale of a solo Nikola Jokic card ever, this Prism Gold, and that's a testament to, frankly, the demand that the Prism Gold has as a card type. And there's going to be some temptation to compare this to sales of the inaugural Prism Golds, which were 2012, which didn't feature many of the great players of the Panini era. Kawhi Leonard does have a 2012 Prism Gold that's seen as a rookie card parallel for him. Anthony Davis has one. Kyrie Irving has one. Those are sort of guys who are part of that double rookie class of the 2012-13 Prism products, or the Prism product. But the difference here, and it's a big one, is that 2012-13 Prism, the rarest parallel was the gold out of 10. There's nothing rarer or more elusive than that. But starting in the next season and for every season thereafter, so from 2013-14 Prism onward, there was at least one Prism 1-of-1 card included in the checklist. So that really shifts the Prism Gold from being the most rare card of a player in the 2012-13 inaugural offering to no longer being the most rare card, and in fact being 10 times more common than the most rare card. So I think that's important context when comparing 2012 Prism to any other year of Prism basketball, is that in that first product, the gold is the rarest card, but thereafter it's 10 times less rare as the rarest parallel that would follow. So one does wonder, if there wasn't a 1-of-1 of the Prism Gold of Jokic or any player from 2013 and onward, what would the value of the Prism Gold be at that point, right? That's an open question. Maybe you don't think it would be any difference at all. Maybe you do. But I think the existence, the tiering of the parallels is important context, I think. Here's what's neat about this card, and this is why I showed you the Summer League photo of Jokic. On this Prism card, and Prism was one of the very first products released during Jokic's NBA rookie season of 2015-16, Jokic is shown in his Summer League jersey, his Denver Nuggets Summer League uniform, and he's shown wearing the number 1. In fact, this the pose that he strikes on this card has been photo matched to a Summer League game. And so the significance of him wearing the number 1, and I didn't see this in any of the marketing materials for the card, but he's wearing the number 1, and this particular copy of the Prism Gold was number 1 of 10. So it's a jersey numbered copy. And it's the only time that there would be a jersey number match on a Prism Gold for Nikola Jokic, because in all the years after, he's pictured wearing the number 15, which is the number he would wear once he debuted on the Nuggets in the regular season. So this is the one shot, and the only shot at getting a jersey numbered Jokic Prism Gold. This one of 10. And it also means that the 1-of-1 is jersey number 2, which I always think is quite silly. Like all of Victor Wembanyama wears the number 1, and that is his number in the NBA. And all or many of his 1-of-1s are marketed as also being jersey numbered because he's jersey number 1, which I guess is true in one sense, but it also just is amusing in a different sense because there's no, there's it's a 1-of-1. So like what's the point of having a jersey number distinction, right? It's to sort of, if there's 10 copies, then one being jersey numbered adds an extra special quality to that card that can distinguish it from the other 9. But if it's a 1-of-1, what's the need for the extra distinguishing? It's already the only one. But perhaps some people do get a kick out of that, or even find value in the jersey number matching. And so for Jokic, very interestingly, this gold prism was jersey numbered. And then Adam, the Real 27 guy, has pointed out that the first printed, or the first, do we know if number 1/10 was the first printed? It symbolizes that it was the first. I don't see any reason to necessarily think that it wasn't, although I suppose the stamps could have been applied backwards, or maybe the first one on the sheet, actually the first one to get printed, maybe got the number 10 and they did it backwards. I don't know. I'm just wildly speculating there. But he sort of made the point that being the first in the sequence of 10, even if it wasn't the first off the press, the fact that it's stamped as the first numerically, that has a significance also. That this was stamped as the first. This is one of the bookends, and we've talked a lot about sort of the rarity that the first in a sequence of things has, the chronological rarity that has. So that's a special contributing factor here too, is that there may have been value placed by bidders on the fact that this is the first of the 10. And maybe there was value placed on the fact that it's jersey number 2, although I don't know. I didn't really see anybody call that out. But a very large sale for Jokic, and a big sale. And then there was one other big sale of his that happened in that same Goldin auction on March 14th. And that's the sale of his 2015 Immaculate Logo Man insert, which is in a PSA 7 holder. The card is not autographed. It has a player-worn Logo Man memorabilia piece in it. And it has a phenomenally beautiful, immaculate design loaded with holofoil. And the image actually that Goldin took of it is really beautiful. It really makes it shine. It really makes the card look amazing. And so that card sold for $298,900. So very much in the ballpark of the Prism Gold. Now, the Prism Gold, I don't really have much context to offer because I don't know how many gold out of 10s Jokic has. I don't know if this is his first gold out of 10. It might be. I know that Prism offered his first 1-of-1. And I know that because I've researched extensively into his 1-of-1s and their release dates. But I don't know if there were any products containing a gold, because Prism was not the first product, not the first NBA licensed product, not the first product period to have a Jokic card. It was the first to have a 1-of-1. I don't know if it's the first to have a gold. And I'm frankly not that interested to look it up either. I'm not super moved by golds out of 10. Not to take away from how special they are. That's just my personal collecting approach. But obviously, clearly, people there's a wealth of data suggesting that people really like golds. They really like their Prism golds. But it's not quite for me. So I just haven't done any deep dives into that. So I don't know if he has any golds before it. I know he has golds after it for sure. I know he's got he's got a fair share of gold parallels. Some are out of 10, some are out of 25. But I haven't ever been super interested in looking into the golds of his rookie offering. But I can tell you a lot more about what his Immaculate Logo Man insert means to his catalog. So I've got the Jokic rookie 1-of-1 checklist that I've made, which has 36 solo Jokic 1-of-1 cards and also 2 multiplayer Jokic 1-of-1s. And that contributes the entirety of his rookie 1-of-1 offering. And within that group of 38, there are 5 cards that have a Logo Man. 3 are solo, and the other 2 are multiplayer. And so here are all of Jokic's 1-of-1 Logo Mans from his rookie season. There is this one that we're looking at, which is the Immaculate insert. And there's also a National Treasures insert that is quite similar. It has the logo man. It doesn't have an autograph. It's player worn. So there's sort of two insert logo man Jokic's from these very premium high-end brands of Immaculate and National Treasures. So that's two of his three solo logo man cards. The other one is actually a logo man autograph card, which also belongs to Immaculate. So there you get the three cards of Jokic from his rookie year that are one-of-ones with a logo man. And then on top of that, there are two rookie logo man autograph one-of-ones of Jokic, where the other player that he's with, the other players that he's with are Nemanja Bjelica and Emmanuel Mudiay. So that gets you to 5 total, but 3 solo. So, I could see a case for sort of, and here we're playing in the realm of inserts. So previously, all the talk we've done about Jokic one-of-ones has taken place on the side of the ledger of the base set one-of-ones. These cards are numbered to insert sets. And so this is a slightly different ball game. Jokic has a total of 18 one-of-one inserts. And so, this logo man here it belongs to that category. And so does National Treasures one. So sort of, I think those two cards are really interesting together. Those are his 2 solo logo man cards, no autograph. I think the multiplayer cards are sort of something different. They're just a different. They're just a slightly different category when you sort of have Nemanja Bjelica and Emmanuel Mudiay taking up half of the square footage of the card's surface. And then the logo man autograph one-of-one, I should clarify, that does belong to the group of base set cards. It is a parallel to a base set card, which makes it pretty special. So there's a little bit of context surrounding what that Immaculate logo man is, and some context surrounding what the Prism Gold, what I don't know about it, but I thought those two sales were noteworthy. I thought the discussion was interesting. A little bit of commentary on price. I think we're pretty clearly in a really strong market. I think we're in a market that is that's quite frankly frothy, and people are really eager and willing to spend a lot of money for especially for highly desired, very rare sports cards. And I think we saw that unfold here. But nonetheless, 2 landmark sales in the sales history of Nikola Jokic. And they're coming on the heels of that January 4th sale that we spent an episode talking about, I guess 2.5 months ago, of his Flawless Diamond one-of-one rookie card, which comes from Flawless's base set, and that's on the base set side of the ledger, and that sale was for $176,900. And so a fun thought experiment is sort of, it was maybe apples and oranges, sort of taking the logo man insert and comparing it to a Flawless Diamond base set. Maybe 2 different styles of collector would target each. But the Prism Gold versus the Flawless Diamond becomes a little more interesting just because each of those are base set parallels. And it's fun to sort of compare those for sure. So, all right, next up on the agenda, let's actually get to the card content that I prepared for today's show. And so this is going to be a big reveal. This is going to be a reveal of a card that I added to my collection about 1.5 years ago. This was towards the end of 2024 when I picked up this card. And then last summer, I picked up the other 2 that we're going to talk about. So as usual, I've prepared a social media post. I'm going to read it and then dissect it a little bit, or meditate on it a bit, or see how it flows, see if there's anything that stands out to review and to analyze. So here is what I wrote. Jokic has 36 rookie year one-of-ones, and within that group are cards with a range of historical roots. For example, his Donruss rated rookie Press Proof Black conjures the 80s, and his totally certified Mirror Holo Blue echoes the foil-infused shine of the 90s. Of course, totally certified doesn't just echo the 90s, it belongs to the 90s. The Totally Certified brand debuted under Pinnacle in 1997 with releases in football, baseball, and hockey. The first Totally Certified basketball product arrived in 2010-11, shortly after Panini acquired the brand and the NBA license. Panini produced 8 seasons of Totally Certified before its NBA license expired, and as for Jokic, he appears in 4 of them, 2015-16, 16-17, 17-18, and 24-25. Jokic's Totally Certified rookie card has just one one-of-one parallel, and it is the Mirror Holo Blue. That's a mouthful, but each word matters. First, a mirror parallel can be found all the way back in the inaugural Totally Certified hockey release of 1997, the Platinum Mirror Gold. Second, the holo is simply Panini's way of describing its shiny foil, which in this case is etched as well. Third, blue is an unusual color blue is an unusual color selection for a one-of-one. Usually a more luxurious word like sapphire is used, but platinum blue was among the original Totally Certified parallels. So bring these 3 things together: mirror, holo, blue, and the result is a powder blue etched holofoil that can almost hold its own next to the first PMGs. As a bonus, the card's glowing blue ends up matching the trim of Jokic's jersey and the Nuggets logo. Panini offered the Mirror Holo Blue one-of-one parallel just once. The next season, 2016-17, received a parallel that looks exactly the same, but was simply called Holo Blue one-of-one. There would be one more Holo Blue one-of-one in 2017-18, but it lacks the etched surface of the other 2. So there are, in effect, 3 seasons of Totally Certified base set Holo Blue one-of-one parallels. I've united all 3 for Jokic, completing the run of his Totally Certified Holo Blue one-of-ones. And thanks are owed to Grant, MK, and Cajun, who each played a role in helping me find them. So let me start there at the end and talk a little bit about the how each of those guys sort of helped me. So Cajun sent me a text at the end of 2024 that said the owner of this card, of Jokic's rookie Mirror Holo Blue one-of-one, reached out to him, and he said, I'd like to put that individual in touch with me. And he did. And then it turned out that that person and I lived pretty close to each other, and we got together and we made a deal, and I bought the card. MK and Grant is a funny story because MK had the 2016 and the 2017 Jokic Holo Blue one-of-ones, and he enjoyed owning them quite a bit. He's high on the Totally Certified cards, and you know, when you have one in hand, you can see why people find them to be very special. You can also see why their lineage is really special too. It's like sort of Panini's most direct connection to the 90s, and a lot of us are, you know, find our roots in the 90s too. And I'll talk a little bit more on that in a second. So MK had 2. And I would offer him from time to time a trade or a buyout, and he would reject all offers. But a card came up that he did want eventually. And so he ended up trading them to Grant at Last National. And then he alerted me to that fact very kindly. And then I went straight to Grant, and I began bargaining with him. And that led to me getting both of them. So that's the story there of how those 3 made it to the collection. Okay, so the thing I wanted to go back to briefly is the connection point to the 90s. And I was, usually I write with a lot of confidence from experience. That's sort of, I'm very familiar with brands or with an era or with a style. And this time, I don't feel that I'm quite as authoritative on Totally Certified. And you may be thinking to yourself, you're not authoritative on anything, buddy. So what, that's totally fair. I'm just trying to describe, trying to explain that in this particular instance, I felt even less authoritative than usual. How about that? And I think part of the reason for that was that I'm very at ease discussing cards and sets from the 90s that are of Michael Jordan or included Michael Jordan. And as the write-up discusses, Totally Certified didn't make any basketball cards until 2010-11. And the Totally Certified lineage is interesting because it's sort of interwoven conceptually with certified versus Totally Certified. And Panini kind of made that relationship explicit for me as an onlooker who has actively collected during the Panini era these certified and Totally Certified products, because when Panini terminated Totally Certified as a product, which happened after 2017-18, they replaced it effectively with regular certified. So sort of they oscillated back and forth from certified to Totally Certified. And then they would bring back Totally Certified for a curtain call in 2024-25. But that curtain call would not have a Holo blue 1/1 or any sort of blue 1/1. So it lined up really neatly with Jokic that the only 3 blue 1/1 parallels from certified would end up being that parallel would end up debuting with Jokic, and then it would end up stopping after 3 seasons. So like Jokic is closely interwoven with that parallel, and that there aren't any that come before him. So it's just, this mirror Holo blue comes. I really think the second year should have also been called the mirror Holo blue, as sort of my write-up implied, because it also has that etched holofoil in the same blue color. So I just think that it should have gotten the same name. I don't know why they took the word mirror off. Maybe there's good reason for it. Maybe the first one shouldn't have been called mirror. But I like that that the word is sort of the mirror, that there's something to distinguish it from the third year, which just doesn't have the etching. Now the third year is very beautiful too, but the etching is what makes it glow. I think that's what gives the 90s PMGs their glow, because those PMG reds and greens have etched holofoil, and these Totally Certified mirror Holo blue 1/1s have that same glow when they're etched. And when they're not etched, it's still very shiny, but it doesn't quite give that glow. So I think the etching was a really nice feature, and I think that's kind of what allowed it to have the aesthetic that conjures up the PMGs of the 90s. So it's too bad that they took that away. But more to the point here, I'm not at ease really discussing certified or Totally Certified, and certified does predate Totally Certified. So my write-up focused on Totally Certified, but there's a whole nother legacy of certified that doesn't get discussed. But I just didn't collect this stuff during the 90s, and Michael Jordan has no certified or Totally Certified cards from the 90s, and it wasn't even in basketball, period. So it's just something that's foreign to me. I really had to lean into research, and I'm very concerned or worried that I made some mistakes. I probably did. I tried to be very careful and fact check everything, but I wasn't quite at home discussing Totally Certified. But I really wanted to sort of make one of the main themes of the explanation and the write-up for this card its connection point to the 90s, because I think Totally Certified is in fact Panini's most direct link to the 90s, given that the Totally Certified brand arose during the 90s, and it's one of the few 90s brands that came over to Panini when it acquired the Donruss playoff IP prior to its debut with the NBA license in 09-10. And they didn't get the Metal Universe IP. That went over to Upper Deck prior to Panini entering the NBA licensed scene. And they don't obviously have any Topps IP, and they obviously don't have any Fleer IP. The Fleer IP is with Upper Deck too. Skybox is with Upper Deck. So, there's not a lot of overlap there were very few brands that were making basketball cards in the 90s that had continuity into the Panini era. But Totally Certified is one. And so that makes it a really unique, special connection point, even though Totally Certified, but that's the rub. That's why Totally Certified was able to sort of come into Panini's fold, is because it wasn't making basketball cards. It wasn't part of that. They did whoever it was, I guess Pinnacle, didn't have the NBA license. And so, Totally Certified has these great roots in the 90s. It made these amazing hockey, baseball, and football cards. And there are some well-known ones, like the Jeter Select Certified Golds, Mirror Golds. And I just sort of will pull up sales history and look at some of the highest selling cards from the 90s that are from Certified or Totally Certified. And there's these beautiful Ken Griffey cards and these Wayne Gretzky's and really, really neat cards, but cards that have never been on my radar as a collector because there just wasn't the basketball overlap and there wasn't the Michael Jordan overlap. So it's really neat that Panini was able to tie itself back into the 90s, albeit through a brand that didn't make basketball cards in the 90s, through that Totally Certified moniker. So there you have it. And I wonder if there's any other parts of this write-up that I sort of wanted to flesh out further. I think that's about it. I think I touched everything. And that's what's interesting, sort of, as the history of cards marches along, that each season sort of accumulates and regurgitates what had come before it. So like with Jokic, if I kind of flip back over to his checklist here from his rookie year, you have a lot of products and sets that either directly take IP from a previous era, which would be the case with Donruss or with Totally Certified, or you have sort of Panini's answer to things that came from a previous era that they don't own IP for. So it's probably not a big stretch to say that like the Prism Black 1 of 1 is Panini's answer to the Topps Chrome Superfractor. And then the Immaculate Logoman Autograph 1 of 1 is sort of Panini's answer to the exquisite Logoman Autograph 1 of 1 of the 2000s. I think you can have a lot of fun doing that and sort of seeing which era, which brand, which idea of card design that these different products channel. And it's, you sort of get a representation of many eras. So that's one of the interesting things. That's one of the things that I sort of felt sort of sort of in the air surrounding my enjoyment of this card is how this card puts me as a collector in touch with a different era. And by connecting to a different era, it's giving itself this extra heft, this extra weight, because that is tapping into something cultural. It's tapping into something deeper than just, these are the new product lines, these cards are cool, knock yourself out. There's this intergenerational cultural connection point when a card like this, I hesitate. I don't believe it's retro or throwback. It's new. It's doing something that hasn't been done before. Introducing the etched hollow foil when Panini did that, and it's Totally Certified, and it did that prior to 2015-16. But the novelty comes from the hollow blue aspect of it. But introducing these design elements to sort of, I think, fuse the etched hollow foil look of the PMGs most likely with the Totally Certified 90s nostalgia, sort of bring all those things together. There's something really cultural and weighty and heavy to that makes the context surrounding this card just feel a little more tapped into the culture and the history of card collecting. And that was something that I wanted to have come through, even though it's kind of has to come through between the lines. It's hard to sort of articulate it directly. And that's sort of why I opened with, so my opening salvo here was that within the group of Jokic's 36 rookie 1 of 1s, there's a range of historical roots. And that's sort of what I was trying to get at, was like I mentioned Donruss conjuring the 80s, and Totally Certified being the card there that conjures the 90s. So a lot of reflection on that card, sort of me outside of one of my comfort zones to some extent. And I also have a lot of respect for collectors who have taken it upon themselves to sort of forge the history of the Panini era Totally Certified. And they're certainly more knowledgeable than me about it. And I sort of followed their lead. And I look forward to them as they continue to share sort of the Totally Certified history. Because the thing about Totally Certified is that it seems to be consensus that the most desired Totally Certified parallels actually are the ones that came right before 2015-16. It seems like the people who sort of collect Totally Certified as a set and collect its parallels as a set are really interested in the 2013s and the 2014s, and not so much the 2015, 16, 17. So not that these are totally disconnected with sort of the cult following that Totally Certified has, but to note that they are different. This would probably be a more iconic card for Jokic. And I think I got a comment on the post to this effect if this card were from 2014-15 rather than 2015-16. But maybe, there's a renaissance coming for this 15, 16, 17 Holo Mirror Blue or Mirror Holo Blue 1/1 era, or then again, maybe not. The blues is, like I pointed out, that's an unusual color for a 1/1. It's not really a color people reach for, that manufacturers reach for. And if they are going to use a blue, they're usually going to go, like I said, with like sapphire or even platinum. And even in the 90s, when the blue parallel was used by Totally Certified, it was a platinum blue. But I guess here, maybe Mirror Holo Platinum Blue 1/1, that might have just been too much of a mouthful, so they pulled it back to just the Mirror Holo Blue 1/1. And the blue ends up being a really nice color for Jokic, because that powder blue or that baby blue or that North Carolina blue echoes one of the secondary colors of the Denver Nuggets color schemes that they use in their uniforms. And in the particular uniform that Jokic is wearing, the white uniform is paired with a blue trim. And so that actually echoes how the Bulls red trim plays against the white uniform, which plays against the red PMG background. And similarly, Jokic has the white uniform with the blue trim set against the blue background. So pretty fun, pretty exciting card set of 3 cards to talk about. And that's another I guess maybe I can sort of wrap it up there, that the lineage of it, sort of completing the run is really interesting. I think having non-rookie cards, so like, let me back up for a second. Frankly, subjectively, the category of cards that I'm most excited about are cards that have a rookie badge, or are from a rookie season, or are from a first, and are 1/1s. That combination, whether it's Michael Jordan's earliest 1/1s, or it's Jokic's rookie year 1/1s, it's a really fun, exciting combination. It's a starting point. But then after that, continuing to collect into seasons that follow, I like the lineage concept. I like the idea of pursuing the other 2 Holo Blue 1/1s that connect back to the starting point of the which is the original, the rookie year Holo Blue 1/1. Just the same goes for any lineages that exist for any of his rookie year 1/1s, like extending out his flawless diamond platinum 1/1 to all the other subsequent non-rookie flawless diamond 1/1s that belong to that same card type, with the select premier level black die cut 1/1 and the others that belong to that card type. So that's a pretty neat way, I think, to collect beyond the scope of the earliest 1/1s by anchoring the pursuit of non-rookie one-of-ones with cards that can be traced back to that original starting point. So the completion is neat. That's sort of my. I've never taken to set collecting, although I've tried it. And I think this is sort of me gaining an insight and an appreciation. Maybe this is where I can find some overlap with set collectors. So I think this is about as close as I get to set collecting, as noticing that there are actually 3 different hollow blue one-of-ones for Jokic, and wanting to complete that trio, wanting to bring those 3 together. All right. So this is the point where I take a sip, and then we move on to the final 2 segments. All right. What I have up for us next now is this is where I start talking about Jokic's 2025-26 season. And starting with the acknowledgement that it seems to be almost certain that he is not going to win MVP, and also that it seems quite certain he's going to receive first team All-NBA. So he's going to get that distinguishing achievement as being regarded as a top 5 player. And even, I think, most would say he's the best player in the world, but certainly is not going to win MVP. That should frame the discussion. We should start there. There could be a sequence of very low probability events that could sort of sweep him into becoming the MVP. Like Cade Cunningham had a collapsed lung. If Wembanyama, Luka, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander also got one, then he might find himself heads up against, say, Jaylen Brown or Donovan Mitchell. And that could be an interesting race. I'm not even sure he would win those races, given the sentiments that I detect from voters. And that sentiment is needing context. Voters, despite what they'll tell you, are not evaluating this season in a vacuum. If they were, I think he'd get plenty of MVP votes. But they're not. They're evaluating the season in the context of he has won 3 regular season MVPs. He has a finals MVP. And then after that finals MVP, with the expectation that the Nuggets would go on and perhaps build a dynasty, they fell short. And they've exited the playoffs in the second round twice now after that championship season. So there's all this context surrounding it. And there's the idea that this guy is quite decorated, and he's also got the statistical legacy that enhances sort of what he's accomplished further. And there's just not an appetite to see him get an MVP this season. The bar for what it would take for him to get MVP is as high as it is for any player in the league. And you're about to see that when I go through what I'm about to go through here. But before I do this, and this is going to be me sort of making his MVP case without making it, because I'm telling you right now that I don't see a realistic path to him getting MVP this year. But that's me evaluating how I think the 100 voters are going to vote. That's not me offering an opinion on whether I think he's the MVP or not. And I think it's a bit silly for me to offer an opinion on that, because I'm clearly biased. And I also am clearly incentivized to want to see him win MVP, because I just got done explaining how I own these great cards of his. So, my collecting approach is very much centered around celebrating great players who have great statistical resumes and great accomplishments and, really formidable legacies. Those are really some of the inspiring aspects of how I collect, of what causes me to collect the player. but it's not only that. I also need to, I also tend to have a connection to that era of cards, or appreciate and like the sets that player belongs to. So like Wilt Chamberlain is a player that fascinates me. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a player that fascinates me. But I'm not at this moment quite moved by the cards that were issued while they were playing. Now that doesn't take away the fact that a really cool collection can be built of these of guys like that by looking at their post playing days cards. Like my buddy Frankie 3500 is showing off an incredible collection of Panini era and pre-Panini era, so like the 2000 Topps era, Dr. J one of ones. It's a great collection. It's a great approach. I think that is such a fun approach to collecting, to take a player like a Dr. J or a Kareem or a Magic Johnson or a Wilt Chamberlain or a Larry Bird, and just wait for them to appear in these clearly post-playing days products and get really, really cool cards of theirs. It's a really cool, interesting approach, but it's just not one that I've found myself drifting towards. So and then I like to be a fan of the player too. And that's an interesting question. How do you become a fan of a player? And there's lots of different ways. And being a fan by itself is not sufficient. I'm a huge Hakeem Olajuwon fan. I have a ton of nostalgia for Olajuwon. I've come really close to winning a few of his cards in the last year or two. I was the runner-up when his 97 Flair Showcase Masterpiece 1 of 1 Row 0 surfaced. And I kind of wish I would have won that. I don't know what happened to it. But I've never quite pulled the trigger there. So it needs more than fandom and nostalgic connection and sentimentality. But it's sort of like I almost gravitate in some sense to either guys who are like really solidified with the total MVP stuff, like a Patrick Mahomes, who's tied for second all time. Tom Brady would be a very viable player for me to collect. He's first all time in the NFL with 8, and nobody else between him and Mahomes. Or Michael Jordan with the 11 total MVPs. Or a guy like Kareem with 8, or a guy like LeBron with 8. I did recently add a LeBron 1 of 1 a few months ago, but I don't know when that will make its way to the podcast discussion. So like I really like those guys who are just unassailably accomplished. I can ease into that. Like easing into Mahomes was I got on board the Mahomes thing when he had 4 total MVPs. And that was an amalgamation of a lot of different approaches. I really wanted to participate in this Panini era of football. And I had Christian McCaffrey, which is an amazing skills position player, which has allowed me to do things like complete his Prism Black finite 1 of 1 run from the base set. But I also wanted a quarterback. I think I'm moved by the idea that the quarterback is the most important position when it comes to impact on winning. I'm moved by the fact that the quarterback is, the player that probably provides me the most opportunities as a fan to root for them on a play-by-play basis. So there's a direct connection there to getting emotionally involved as a fan. And then there is this clearly dominant quarterback from the vantage point of individual accolades, which is Patrick Mahomes with the 5 total MVPs. So, you kind of put all that stuff together, and Mahomes spoke out to me. And like I said, I started with Mahomes when he had 4 total MVPs, and then I got to be a pretty deeply involved collector as he won his 5th. So, but so there's that category of player that I like to collect. And then there's the other category, which is sort of the player who is remarkable and is quite literally like the top or very, very near the top at some really meaningful or multiple meaningful aspects of their sport, and not just currently, but in its history, and who just doesn't have the hype, and that's sort of the bucket that Nikola Jokic falls into, with all the statistical accomplishments, with the player efficiency rating stuff that we just went over. But if you don't like player efficiency rating, do that same exercise with impact metrics. It's going to be the same. Jeremiah Engelman's regularized adjusted plus minus, he calls it the X, his X RAPM, gives Jokic the highest. He ranks him the highest of any player all time, with that data set being based on lineup data, so it goes back to 96, 97. So it doesn't have Magic, MJ, Larry, Wilt, Kareem, Russell. It doesn't have those guys because we don't have on-off stuff for them. We don't have plus-minus stuff for them. But it's since 96, 97, it's got him in first. So, that's the Jokic aspect, is like pick your poison, box plus minus, adjusted plus minus stuff, the player efficiency rating stuff. He's in first all time in these things. To further elaborate a bit on that, he is first all time in player efficiency rating, career. He is first all time box plus minus, career. He is first all time in Engelman's regularized adjusted plus minus, career. It's hard to find at this point. It's hard to find a catch-all metric, whether it's summed box score stuff or it's impact stuff, that doesn't have him in first. That's really special. And he isn't celebrated as if that's the case. He is celebrated as a great player, but he's not celebrated like he's got a claim to be the best. And I really like that. I really get excited about living in that in-between. And it gives me all this ground to argue with people and sort of have these sneaky trump card stats and surprise people, that hey, look, like, did you actually know this and this about this guy? I really get a thrill out of that. I really get a thrill. It's the indie band thing. It's like discovering this amazing band that not quite everybody else has discovered. It's a fun place to live. Now, the embodiment of that even more than Jokic is what I'm trying to do with Brock Purdy, because Purdy is another guy who is really, really high on football's catch-all metrics and impact metrics and efficiency metrics. Really, really high. Like he has the highest passer rating of all time. It's him, and then it's Aaron Rodgers, and it's Lamar Jackson. And so that's a pretty fun thing. And Lamar Jackson is an interesting target too. Like, Lamar has some of this flavor, and I've flirted with collecting Lamar a few different times. And for example, I had Lamar's rookie select courtside gold for a little while, but I just didn't love the card. And every time I see Lamar's Prism Black Finite come up, I'm like, man, that's a really fun, cool card. Like, I'll say this: if Lamar gets another MVP, if he gets a Super Bowl MVP, then I start really looking hard at Lamar. And then Christian McCaffrey has a bit of this flavor too, where he's got a case to be the most productive fantasy football player of all time. It's certainly at the skills position. So, but I digress. That's sort of like kind of an insight, and a raw off the cuff insight into how I kind of decide to collect different players. Like, when a player compels me so much that I decide to start a collection, it's a really interesting moment. I wonder, for the collectors who might be listening to this, I wonder what your moment is when you cross that threshold into, I'm going to start a PC of this player, and then you stick with it too. So, some off the cuff thoughts there, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through Jokic's 2025-26 season. This season that 10 years from now people will look back on and say, "Wow, why did he finish like fifth in MVP voting? That doesn't make any sense." And let me explain to you why that is. So, in points per game, Jokic is seventh. Well, it looks like here he's at 28.2, and Kawhi Leonard is at 28.2 and sixth. So I don't know if they're statistically tied or if they're just tied by rounding. But Basketball Reference has got him in 7th. Okay, so 7th in points per game, 28.2. And that's about as low as you're going to see him on any of the lists that follow. In rebounds per game, he is first at 12.6. And in assists per game, he is first at 10.5. So that combination of leading the league in rebounds per game, leading the league in assists per game, and being 7th in points per game, pretty special. Now, he shows up on stats like steals per game. He's at 1.5. There seems to be multiple players who round to 1.5. 1.5 steals per game is he's at 15th, but Trey Murphy's at 1.5 and he's at 10th. So blocks per game, I'm not sure he shows up there. He's clearly not much of a rim protector. This is where this augments the scoring number quite a bit. He is currently second by 2 1,000ths of a point to Rudy Gobert in true shooting percentage. And Gobert is almost always at the top of true shooting percentage. So Jokic's true shooting percentage on this season is 67.7%. Gobert's is 67.9%. Or as Basketball Reference, the reason why I said 2 1,000ths is because Basketball Reference has it as 0.677 and 0.679. He was in first for the statistic all season, but he's in a shooting slump right now, especially from 3. True shooting percentage is a really cool metric. True shooting percentage factors in the value of a 2-point shot, the value of a 3-point shot, and the value of a free throw. And it combines those numbers to give you an estimate of how many points per possession a player is scoring, or how efficiently they're scoring per possession. But it's factoring in the free throw aspect of it too. If you want to take out the free throw aspect of it, you have effective field goal percentage. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, that's a great comparison to see like how effective of a scorer is a player outside of at the free throw line. Although that can't totally be separated because guys who draw fouls a lot aren't going to have as many misses, so it's going to sort of, because those misses end up placing them at the line. But let's not get let me just stick on true shooting percentage here. True shooting percentage factors in a player's efficiency from all the different spots on the floor, and it factors in how often they shoot from each of those spots on the floor. And so Gobert is a guy who doesn't do much that's not directly at the rim, that's not dunking. His shot diet is lots and lots of dunks, catching lobs. And so every time he does take a shot, it's a dunk or it's something near the rim, and it has a really, really high percentage of converting into 2 points, to putting 2 points in the scoreboard. Jokic is converting at that same rate, but we all know that Jokic doesn't dunk, not very often. And he actually doesn't really operate near the rim that much. His shot diet is much more like that of a perimeter player. He takes 5 3-pointers a game, takes tons of mid-range shots, and he does work at the rim too, but lots of players work at the rim. He's certainly not having the shot diet of the other players that are surrounding him, which is Rudy Gobert, Jalen Duren, DeAndre Ayton, and Mark Williams. So what this is saying is that Jokic is converting his scoring. He's converting shots into points at the same rate as the guys who stand at the rim and dunk, except he's not standing at the rim and dunking. He's shooting threes and he's shooting mid-range shots. And so that's sort of a testament to his efficiency. And then sort of the way that you flesh that out further is you look and you say, Gobert is a guy scoring 10, 12, 14 points a game, somewhere in that range. DeAndre Ayton is a guy scoring in that range. I think Duren maybe is up closer to 18 or 20 points. Jokic is in the top 10 in scoring. So Jokic is doing this at a volume that's doubling, or maybe even more than doubling up guys like Gobert and Ayton, and has a significant gap with guys like Duren. But he's doing this extremely efficient scoring from a far more diverse set of places on the floor, and he's doing it with volume. In other words, like if you're having Jokic on offense is a bit like just being able to give the ball to Gobert and have him dunk it a bunch of times. That's sort of a way to interpret the efficiency of what he's doing there. So there's this argument that even though he isn't leading the league in scoring, and he's not close to leading the league in scoring, he's at 28, and Luka's out there at almost 34 points per game. But the efficiency at which he's scoring makes an argument. It sort of, you could start marshaling together these things to say, is he the greatest scorer in the league right now? And there's lots of different ways to take that, right? Like Luka has an argument, Shea has an argument. There's lots of guys who have arguments, and you bring in context, and there's going to be lots of different ways to analyze that. But he's got an argument for it. And he's got an argument to be the best rebounder because he leads the league in rebounds per game. And he's got an argument to be the best passer because he leads the league in assists per game. That's this season. Okay, but there we were breaking down individual things and sort of looking at the component parts of the things that go into a stat like player efficiency rating. So then it's no surprise. Now we get to let's look at the catch-alls. He's first in player efficiency rating, as we've already gone over, and that's the highest mark of all time. He's first in the catch-all of box plus minus. And his box plus minus of 14.5 is first all time. And the next closest season is like a few points away. So there's two of Basketball Reference's 3 catch-all metrics that are rate-based, player efficiency rating and box plus minus. Both have this guy scoring the highest of all time. Of all Michael Jordan seasons, all LeBron James seasons. This season is ranking out higher. Basketball Reference's third and final rate-based catch-all is win shares per 48. And there he's in second, and SGA is first. And he is highest in win shares per 48 all-time career, but this season he finds himself in second place. So a few other things that I'll touch on briefly as well. So Basketball Reference has this kind of wonky offensive rating metric where their offensive rating metric is a calculation that's designed to attempt to model what your offensive rating would be, because it was invented before the tracking existed to actually figure out what your offensive rating is. Just points per 100 possessions when you're on the floor. And they have an estimate, but I can't even find it on the screen right now anyway. But that's not the point, because I didn't want to talk about theirs anyway. I want to talk about the real offensive rating. The Denver Nuggets this season, for however many seasons in a row now, have the highest offensive rating in the NBA. And so you have Jokic there, who is the engine of the highest offensive rating in the league. And offensive rating is this sort of the apples to apples way. Offensive rating is quite literally telling you how many points per possession does your team score times 100. And the Nuggets are first, and Jokic is the engine of that offense. And they're probably the highest of all time, but I haven't checked. But so you've got this season. You've got this season from Jokic. Let me look at a few other catch-alls too. So NBA-RAPM.com, their time decayed regularized adjusted plus minus has Jokic in first. Darko daily plus minus has Jokic in first, plus 7.5. Jokic's on-off, his raw on-off, without removing any low leverage or anything, is plus 14, which isn't quite where it was in other seasons, which is probably a bit of a testament to the fact that the Nuggets starters haven't been quite as good. Maybe that's because of injuries and Aaron Gordon missing so much of the season and stuff. But their starters haven't been quite as good, and their bench has been a bit better. That's what on-off is. The on-off is the difference between when you're on the floor and when you're off. But plus 14 is I believe that's the second highest number in the league. It's certainly the second highest among the quote-unquote MVP candidates. So by comparison, the player who has him edged out on raw on-off is Victor Wembanyama. Now Jokic typically has led this on-off number year after year after year. and it's usually been somewhere around plus 20. But this year, plus 14, a bit lower for him. And then Wembanyama's got a fascinating, a huge on-off there. I'm quite sure he's first. And then some of the other guys, Giannis, who's missed a lot of the season, he's plus 13.3. Kawhi is plus 11.9. Shea is plus 8.3. So that's the on-off. He's not first. He's perennially first, but this year he's a little bit behind Wembanyama. There's still enough time for that to change, but it looks like Wembanyama might wrap that up. Then we have Andy Bailey's Huge Nerd Index, which is where he actually looks at 10 different, he looks at 5 different catch-alls, and he uses their rate-based and their cumulative. So it's 5 different metrics with the per-minute version of it and then the cumulative version of it. So the cumulative is going to reward people who have played more minutes. And then the per minute is going to reward the players who have been most efficient, who have been most productive. And that Huge Nerd Index has Jokic and Shea quite close. Jokic has an average rank across those 10 catch-alls of 1.7, and Shea is at 1.9, and then third is Luka at an average rank of 3.9. Fourth is Wemby with an average rank of 5.4, and Kawhi is fifth with an average rank of 5.9. But volume, minutes played, games played is impacting this stuff. Like Wemby would be higher if he had played more minutes. The gap between Jokic and Shea would be larger, but Shea has played 4 more games and he's played more minutes. And Luka would probably be lower, but he plays a lot of minutes. So that's kind of there. Andy does an over-index on cumulative. He splits it. Half of it is the rate base and half of it is the cumulative, and that produces this Huge Nerd Index, which has Jokic in first. And the metrics that he's using are box plus minus and its cumulative version, which is value over replacement. He's using estimated plus minus from dunks and threes and its cumulative, which is estimated wins. He's using Basketball Index's LeBron metric and its wins above replacement, which is its cumulative. He's using ESPN's net points and its cumulative, and he's using Basketball Reference's game score per 100 possessions and its cumulative total game score. And that cues me up for the final thing I wanted to do. So let me see if there's any other meditations as you try to figure out what could this possibly mean that I'm showing on the screen here, this painting. Okay, so that's the recap of the Jokic season. That's the backdrop against which his Prism Gold is selling for $320,000. And that's the mismatch of sort of him being categorically ruled out of the MVP stuff. And to add some context to the MVP stuff, the Nuggets are a 6th seed right now, 6th seed. And the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the Thunder are the 1st seed. Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs are the 2nd seed. Luka Doncic and the Lakers are the 3rd seed. Those 3 are, I think, consensus ahead of him in this MVP race. Jaylen Brown and the Celtics have a better record, albeit in the East. So, this is Cade Cunningham and the Pistons too, although Cunningham now is going to miss a chunk of games. Jokic missed a lot of games too. He missed a month. He's like, I think still he can miss one more game and be at 65 games and qualify. So I think there's that's being held against him too. But when you review what we just reviewed, from the points, rebounds, assists stuff to the efficiency, true shooting stuff to the catch-alls, whichever way you want to split it, whether you want the adjusted plus minus, whether you want the aggregate that sums up all of them. Man, it's tough to say that anybody on the whole is better. There, you can find a stat that has Wemby ahead of him. So like Wemby's on-off is higher. Spurs have a better record. And in fairness to the Nuggets, they are clumped in. Like the 3, 4, 5, and 6 seeds are really close. I think Basketball Reference's playoff probabilities has the Nuggets finishing 4th. So maybe that's where they land. With the team record thing, team record apparently means a lot to voters. And the name of the game is winning. And all of this like sort of calculating that we do when we review a season is just to approximate how good a player is, and how good a player is presumably is a measure of how much they impact winning. But you can have these situations where you've got a guy who has every number saying that he's impact winning as much or more than anybody else in the league and than anybody else in history. But he's just maybe not on a team that's quite as good as the other teams, or his team is dealing with injuries that are specifically impactful to them, like missing Aaron Gordon, who's a very important part of that team. And the team success isn't up to par with Lakers, Spurs, Thunder, Boston, and Detroit. You can say that, but that's not looking at, or that's to completely disregard what quite a few metrics are saying. And even if you don't want to buy into the plus minus stuff, the adjusted plus minus stuff, which there's no reason not to buy into it. It's robust and rigorous and interesting. I also think there's plenty of flaws with it, but the work being done there is quite good. But even if you don't want to buy into that, just the box score stuff is outrageous. Effectively, he's leading the league in true shooting, he's leading the league in rebounding, and he's leading the league in assists. He's really got an argument to be the best scorer, the best rebounder, and the best passer. So, quite a special season. I want to do a little bit, which I sort of teased about advocacy versus impartiality. And so here I'm advocating for Jokic. I'm trying to be impartial about it in the sense that I'm not trying to mislead, and I'm not trying to distort or overemphasize. I'm just trying to make the case for him and focus on the things that are very special about what he's doing. But that's advocacy. And if that's quite different than what the 100 voters theoretically should be doing, the 100 media members who are impaneled to make the decision of who wins MVP. Those people need to be impartial, and they can't be doing advocacy. Not if the award is going to mean anything. If they're advocating rather than being impartial, then they are. Then they're not. Then what that means is that the MVP was the result of people, pushing for a specific point of view rather than trying to take them all into account. And so, to be quite frank, I don't know who I would settle on for MVP if I were to try to be one of those 100 voters, but I surely couldn't advocate. Instead, I would ask the Jokic fan club, the Luka fan club, all the different fan clubs. I would ask them to advocate to me so that I can see what they think is the strongest case. Then I can pour over everything and try to figure out what it is. But that's just not the mental headspace that I'm in. That's not my job. That is the job of a jury member. Those 100 voters are the jury members. I'm an advocate. And the metaphor here is the legal system. In the law, you've got these different people who serve different roles. You've got attorneys who are advocates and who are members of what is explicitly known as an adversarial system, meaning there's a belief that truth will arise from a vigorous, passionate presentation of the competing sides. And so if you're an advocate of one side of a dispute, it's not your job to make the other side's case. It's your job to do the best you can to make your case. But there are temptations, incentives to exaggerate or to introduce evidence that can bias or mislead the jury, or to use science and methodologies that don't quite pass the standard that the court would like to see when it allows the opinions of science to come in. And so then there's the role of the judge. And the judge is there to make sure that the evidence that comes in is what it purports to be. And the judge is there to make sure that the evidence that comes in isn't going to have the effect of tainting the jury. The judge is there to make sure that procedure is properly followed. And then there's the jury, whose job it is to find what the facts are and then apply the law, or in this case, apply the MVP criteria to those facts. And so the jury and the judge and the advocates, or the lawyers, those are three very different roles. And then same thing, I think that translates over to dialogue surrounding awards in the NBA, and very particularly the MVP. I'm an advocate, and I want to be an advocate, and I like being an advocate, and I'm incentivized to be an advocate. And I want to try to be an advocate as vigorous and as passionately as I can for the players that I'm predisposed to want to see win. But I also don't want to end up doing or saying anything that's inaccurate or misleading or disingenuous. So I want to submit evidence that the judge will let in. I want to submit evidence that is fair, and that the jury pool can see without unfairly biasing them. So I want to submit that evidence. I want to submit my methodologies that are rigorous and robust, and that are that's your BPMs and your PERs and those things. And then I want the jury to look at it, and I want everybody to make the case for their person and look at the case that's made for whoever that they're supporting, and then let the jury decide. But I think that's the right way to think about this, and that's the way that I try to think about it. And I think, like, intentionally understanding where I sit, what functional role am I occupying on this stage? Knowing that helps me understand what I'm doing and what I'm not doing, and it helps prevent me from thinking that, or from slipping into the belief that I'm acting as a jury member when I'm not. I'm acting as an advocate. Now, I do believe genuinely that the point of view that I'm advocating for should or would persuade a jury to see it my way, but assuming that all sides that are advocating are playing by the same rules and so forth. But I also am quite willing to admit that there are other points of view that I may be missing something, and that maybe a jury can decide the other way, and that just the case I presented wasn't strong enough, or the way I presented it wasn't quite right, or what have you. I think the MVP is a very interesting topic. What does it mean? It often means something slightly different from year to year. And I don't know. I don't necessarily think that that's a bug. I think that might be a feature of what that award is. It might be kind of neat that as different things enter the discussion, and different metrics emerge, and different ways of understanding what's happening in basketball happen, that the criteria for what an MVP is can shift too. I don't take issue with that, and I think that I think it's also worth acknowledging the margin of error that exists in these stats. So, like, I can show you, hey, Jokic, his time decayed RAPM is +8, and Wemby's is +6.9. But how big of a difference? How big of a gap is that, right? Are these guys kind of falling into a margin of error of each other? Is it really meaningful that he's +0.1 over Wembanyama in this metric, or can that discrepancy be explained by noise? Or can that discrepancy be explained by just the inadequacies of the measurement? And it probably can. So then, it's difficult, especially when a player that you really like is at the top of some of these metrics. It's difficult but necessary to say, but these aren't definitive. There's a margin of error here, and there are players who are pretty close, and there's always going to be, especially because these sample sizes are never large. And like, one of the methodological issues that a lot of these models deal with is trying to stabilize them bring in box score stuff and bring in prior season stuff, time decay, bring in these different tools to try and shrink the variability and to try to get to something stable and predictive. So like, given all these sort of shortcomings and sort of the inadequacy of the sample sizes and everything else, it's not quite right to just say, well, the numbers say this, and the guy who's in first, that's the winner. There's more to it than that. There's different angles and approaches too, like the stuff that Basketball Index is doing, where they're looking at they're looking more at things like what shot quality is a player creating for their teammates, and they're looking at things like and given their role and given the limitations or the advantages that this player has from their teammates, how much talent is involved in doing what they're doing. And so that's a really interesting context piece that sort of helps frame that, for example, maybe Jokic is scoring very efficiently, but a big part of that is because, there's so much gravity that some of his other teammates like Jamal Murray command, that that his efficiency requires some context, that his efficiency isn't all attributable to him. So, there's these discussions can just go on, and they're interesting, and there is a place and a time for advocacy. I think I kind of want to advocate for that. I want to kind of advocate that it's okay. It might actually be the best to help us get to the truth if we have reasonable advocates for different points of view and different players. It might even be best, sort of if we had like a judge that would say, okay, Chris, you have to advocate for Jaylen Brown, and this other guy, you have to advocate for Luka, and you have to advocate for Cade, and sort of we randomly assign who we have to advocate for, and see what would be the result of that deliberation if I didn't get to pick who I want to advocate for, but it got randomly assigned to me, and see how that would work. And ideally, you would have an even number of advocates for everybody. But we're not. That's obviously ridiculous. That's not going to happen, and it's not that serious. But the advocacy part of it, I think it's fine. I think it's completely fine for people to advocate, but they should know that they're being advocates, and it can be. And I think there's a distinction there between the advocate and the impartial judge. And that sometimes the reason why an advocate, somebody who's doing advocacy, runs up against somebody who sees themselves more as an impartial judge, and they sort of talk past each other because they're not understanding that the impartial judge doesn't understand this guy's advocating, and the advocate doesn't understand that this guy's not trying to take a side. And so there can be some breakdowns in communication when those two different archetypes come up against each other. So, musings. But here's the final thing that I wanted to touch on here. This is why I have this picture up of this prehistoric human civilization. So I started watching this YouTube video that just came into my algorithm about archaeology, and it particularly was like targeting this idea that prehistoric civilizations were just kind of these survival games where, like, these people don't have much by way of technology. They don't have, much by way of resources. They're just kind of in the wild, in the state of nature. Shout out John Locke. And they are just fending for themselves and trying to gather up food and just trying to stay warm at night. And they're huddled in caves, and that's this miserable, tortured existence of just sort of toiling and just trying to survive. And the video quickly dispelled that. And the video actually said that even these prehistoric civilizations, they certainly spent time hunting and gathering, and they certainly built fires and lived in caves and had to keep warm and had to keep watch and had to look out for each other. But they were far from these like base survival groups, that they were actually quite cultured, that in fact they even dedicated more time to leisure and to play than modern people do today, that we spend more time sort of banging away at our keyboards or driving into work and and we spend more time doing things like that than these prehistoric folks did. And this just and in particular, the idea of leisure was brought up. This idea that even in these prehistoric times, that leisure, and in fact, there was actually a pressure for the creation of culture because so much information was transmitted through dialogue and through talking, that there's almost like an evolutionary pressure that the societies and the groups of people that facilitated the most comfort and ease with interacting with each other would maybe even be in an advantage, because like one family or group of people knows a lot about sort of which vegetation is poisonous and which isn't, and another group is really good at sort of stalking and hunting a certain type of animal, and another group is really good at sort of building shelter and so on. And so the more they can share with each other and pass on knowledge to each other and transmit ideas and information to each other, the better off they might be. And then it stands to reason that the people who are most comfortable and at ease with each other and trusting each other and sort of letting their guards down with each other, there might actually be an advantage to that. That the cultivation of culture and leisure facilitates a camaraderie that's better for the survival of the group. And so where am I going with this? I was struck and actually had put at ease even a bit by how important culture and leisure were to these prehistoric societies. Because what are we doing with cards? What are we doing with following sports? This is culture and leisure. And sometimes a guilt can set in that says, are we just, indulging in leisure and culture? Are we not living right? Are we out of sync with our nature? Is this who we are? Is this the proper way to spend our time, or is there a higher calling, or is there something more significant, more important, more human that we should be doing rather than participating in effectively the game of collecting? In the sportsmanship of sports fandom. And the whole idea of a sport, which is quite a silly idea in itself, putting a ball in a hoop and hitting a different one with a stick, and but so it was soothing, it was calming, it was so insightful to think about how much time even these prehistoric people put into culture and leisure, and how important culture and leisure were to them, and how you can see that surely we inherited these properties, which developed and evolved over tens and tens of thousands of years. And then here we are. And so the sort of the nature, the naturalness of culture and leisure and what we do as collectors, I was just struck by sort of the similarity and sort of that the enjoyment of life, in proportion, in balance, the balancing the culture and the leisure, balancing that against the hunting and the gathering and the providing for each other and the safety of each other. But the culture and the leisure mattered, and they were present, and those things were present then. And then we've done the Professor Wynn stuff, and the Professor Bernard Suits stuff, and the sort of the utopia, and in utopia the purpose of life is to play games. But I'm always thinking about these things. And interest, to call back to an earlier part of the opening ramblings, introspecting. And anyway, that was a parting thought that I would leave you with. I don't have anything much more to add, I don't want to try and squeeze something more profound out of it than is there. But I wanted to talk about it for a few minutes at the end. If there was time, there was. So this has been Nikola Jokic's 2025-26 HOJ-Cast episode, showing off some totally certified cards. Next episode, like I said, I think Luca's finally going to get his. And that should be a fun one. And then maybe back to Michael Jordan 1-of-1s. Can't wait to see where the 2026 NBA playoffs take us, because that's sort of a reset. No matter if your guy wins the MVP or not, I like to say there are two shots to win an MVP every season. There's the regular season, and then when that's over with, we put it behind us, we move on, And now there's the playoffs, and there's going to be one person who becomes finals MVP. And that MVP goes into my total MVP metric and is weighted just as much as the regular season MVP. Granted, plenty of people don't agree with that. Plenty of people have arguments that it should be more and it should be less. But 2 chances to win MVP. So even if your preferred player doesn't get this one, a whole new chance in a compressed season in the playoffs. That happens right after. And the finals MVP is up for grabs. We will see you next time. This has been HOJ-Cast 34.